Name one.
The University of Texas.
Okay, so
We didn't think you'd actually have an example.
I have a list.
they agree on the color of the sky.
Right.
Well, the first,
but you haven't answered my question.
but I think you just made that up. If you didn't, please tell us what church it is, because that's not Catholic teaching.
Sure.
It'll be
One of the
closed
pairs
down.
I went to was
Did you say you're not supposed to wear rosaries?
as a
Have you
As a
never? Have you
Catholic?
never been to Italy?
no, but I was a Catholic
No, you
for
haven't.
like 16
Okay.
years, and wearing a rosary
very
was a
good.
big no-no. We got in big trouble in school when we did that. But
The answer to your question is race.
the funniest thing is I actually just made that up. I was seeing if he would actually try to talk his way through that, but I totally made that up. Thanks, Milo. We're not getting rid of cell phones. We're not putting women back in the kitchen. We're not getting rid of birth control. The internet's not going anywhere. We're not locking down our borders. You know, we live in a world today that is as much different from 1980 as 1980 was from the 1200s that, you know, Milo's so obsessed with. We need better conversations with people, better policies that we can advocate for, better things that we can talk about to move our people forward, rather than having people endlessly fracture and atomize themselves.
The question we're going to be answering today is, should Christian nationalism be the dominant governing ideology of America? We will have 10 minutes each of prepared opening statements, and then each of you guys will be able to go through 5 minutes of rebuttals each, and then I will ask 2 questions for each of you, and we'll rotate between you guys. You'll each have 5 minutes to answer the question I've directed towards you, and the other person will have 3 minutes to respond. And then we will have a 30-minute Q&A and crossfire where you guys will have questions from the audience, and you will also then be allowed to sort of go back and forth between the two of you. So you can kind of have fun with it. It'll be a complete free-for-all. So after that, we'll go for 5 minutes each for closings, and you guys are allowed to have prepared openings, and I will give you guys hand signals throughout so that we're all on time and so that everything is running smoothly. So let's get started with the openings. It will be 10 minutes each, and we are going to start with Milo.
Is that indigo?
My hair?
Yes.
We call it blue over here. Okay.
Okay. I have to give you some credit for having the cojones to show up in Tennessee barely a month after the bullet-ridden bodies of children have been buried, as a sort of representative for a culture that did it, and offering anything but condolences and sympathy. I think it's disgusting. I think it's shameful. How dare you? How dare you show up here offering anything but sympathy? Because, you know, I think, I should stand or something. We're familiar with what happened in Tennessee. We're less familiar with the reasons why. But the reason was that at any given time in society, there are about 20% of people who are just nuts. And those people will glom on to whatever the fad is for people who are nuts. So the current nuts is trans. You can see in the social trends when you plot anorexia and bulimia, which was the big thing when I was growing up, against the new nuts. That there's basically about 1 in 5 people who are just not really all there and will kind of do whatever. But when you hand those people, those unstable and dangerous people, a victimhood script, when you give them a license to commit violence in the name of their supposed identities, instead of giving them the treatment and the love and the prayers that they need, you turn those people into killers. You turn those people into time bombs. And there used to be something in America that would protect against that. It was Christianity. I think it's shameful that anybody would show up so soon after a tragedy caused by the kind of ideologies that you support and do anything but offer sympathy and condolences and celebrate the ideology that has protected us against this sort of thing for so long. It's outside the scope of our evening this evening to prove or disprove the truth of Christianity or Christ or whatever. But I'll make a few points. There is no America without Christ. And the reason for that is that this is an intrinsically and fundamentally Christian nationalist country, by which we mean it's built into the architecture of the nation. There's no getting away from it. You can lie about it. You can pridefully claim that, you can be good people without Christ. You can't. You're just inheriting a system of good and evil from the culture in which you grew up, which accords with the natural law. America was founded, as Adams told us, with a constitution that is wholly unsuited to the governance of anyone but a moral and religious people. And when he said religious, he meant Christian, although he himself was wandered through various different kinds of heresy. What Adams said was that this country is, that its founding documents, that its founding architecture, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, were wholly and fundamentally unsuited to the governance of anything but a moral and religious people. Do you think that America is comprised of a moral and religious people today? Obviously it is not. And what he meant specifically was Christianity, because the way that America is set up outsources morality to Christianity. And without it, it doesn't work, because jury trials don't work when people vote with race instead of conscience and truth. A society doesn't work when people don't obey contracts, don't obey their word, when they're oath breakers. The architecture of America rests fundamentally on a bedrock of Christianity, without which the entire thing falls apart. And that's exactly what's happening. And you don't have to take my word for it. You don't even have to take Adams's word for it, but one of your own Supreme Court justices, somebody who was famously left-wing, Rehnquist, I think it was. Can't bother to look it up, but he said that everything in America presupposes the legal system, the social system, the government. Everything in America presupposes the existence of the Judeo-Christian God. Without that, it all comes tumbling down. And without that, it is coming tumbling down. And without that, we're not able to give people who have terrible sicknesses and weaknesses and defects the help that they need. Instead, we hand them victimhood scripts, and they shoot up schools, they shoot up churches, whether they are young white guys on antidepressants or whether they're transgender people who are told that it's white Christians are responsible for all of their miseries. It is Christianity that keeps us nice to each other, that keeps us being good to one another. And if you toss it out, as happened in 1776 here, you have a really big problem on your hands, because, and I'm going to say something very radical and difficult to say in Tennessee of all places, there are freedoms afforded to Americans that are too radical and too great and too daring without the insulation of Christianity. The First and Second Amendments don't work unless everyone's Christian. They don't work, and they're not working. They're not functioning. You can't give crazy atheists guns. You can't let shameless liars say whatever they want about other people in public without consequence. There's a sort of unwritten rule that sits behind everything in America. And it is that these are all the things you get to do because we know that you can handle it. We know that you can be trusted with this because you love God, because you respect life, because you won't take other people's lives, because you'll keep your word. Without that, the First and Second Amendments become a sort of license to abuse one another or to kill one another. They become a license to lie. They become a license to murder. They become too much freedom, because there is such a thing. And without an underpinning moral architecture, this country doesn't work. And it's not working. And since this country has fallen away from God, the Christian God, this country has begun to fall apart. And that's why all of this terrible shit is happening. That's why all the awful stuff on TV is going on. It's why you can no longer trust people to keep their words if you don't know them. It's why everybody keeps voting with their skin color or their sexuality or gender or whatever bollocks it is today. Because they're not unified under Christ, because they're not one under Christ, because they're not brothers and sisters in Christ. It doesn't matter if you agree with the literal truth of Christianity or not. The founders did, and they made a country for people who did. And if you don't agree with that, or you don't like God, or you don't see why too much freedom is leading us all to hate and kill each other, and you don't appreciate that we should not only restore Christianity in culture, but require it in public life, you should go to Canada. You should go somewhere else where there's a moral architecture built into the law. But here, it doesn't work without God. And when you don't have him, when instead people replace prayer and the rituals of the church with antidepressants, with compound interest, with games and drink and drugs and fornication, kind of thing he does with his wife, you know, offering her around town like she's common property. America doesn't work when we behave that way, because we'll all just end up murdering each other. That's all.
Destiny, you have 10 minutes.
This is terrible.
It's not every day I'm the progressive. Oh, what? Here? Yeah? Oh, nice. Okay. I'm not used to arguing for more freedoms against conservatives on stage, but I guess that's where we're at right now with the conservative movement, or whatever part of the conservative movement this is. Today, we've got viewers gathered from all across the world tuning in to a debate between me and Milo, where Milo is going to argue that we should turn the USA into an isolated, authoritarian, zealously religious country. I think that technology is the Pandora's box that has changed this country and this world forever, and I don't think we're ever going back to the days of public squares and mail service by horse. Cultural exchange is happening, whether you like it or not, quite literally at the speed of light. Even right now, potentially hundreds of thousands or even millions of people around the world are listening to me and Milo have this debate. The only way to stop this type of cultural exchange is through the militant authoritarianism that Milo is talking about on this stage. That might be through his being against the First Amendment, that might be against his taking away of the Second Amendment, and that might be through the institution of a state religion. This means the destruction of our freedom of speech, our ability to produce media, satire, and comedy, and our ability to communicate openly on the social media platforms we've all unfortunately grown addicted to. After Milo gets his way and abolishes the First Amendment, is he going to be the one deciding who we can or cannot make fun of on Twitter? Is the world really going to return to how it was before birth control, before women had the right to work, before gay people were allowed to get married, before we were allowed the ability to freely worship whatever God we wanted, or abstain from worship altogether? I reckon that we cannot close Pandora's box. Christian nationalism, as it stands today, isn't even a coherent ideology. The proponents will argue whether there's an ethnic component, whether one needs to be Catholic or not, and whether one needs to even be a Christian or a supporter at all in order to idolize somebody for a Christian nationalist ideology. How many more porn stars does Donald Trump need to work his way through behind his wife's back before Christian nationalists stop worshiping him as their savior? As small as Christian nationalism is as a movement, even with it being as small as it is, there is still endless infighting. Anyone who's taken a gander recently at Milo, Ali Alexander, or Fuentes' Telegram account can attest to that. And now, with an already fractured and fighting minority movement, some want to put even more restrictions, such as race, lineage, sexuality, LGBT status, or geography on who ought to be allowed to join their movement. The glory days of Christianity are largely over. While the number of worshipers have ebbed and flowed through time, it's impossible for us to return to where we came from. In 1999, almost 70% of Americans were part of a church, synagogue, or mosque. And just 20 years later, in 2020, according to Pew Research, that number has fallen to just 47%, a minority of the population for the first time in U.S. history. We need to be realistic about the coming years. We need to help our young men and women find purpose in the world, stop pretending like some Christian nationalism is the answer. We need to find ways to get our young people engaged with their friends, family, and their communities in ways that synergize with the technological explosion the entire world has experienced. If Christian nationalists want to continue to practice Christianity in America, then I say we let them. However, we should never allow them to take away our right not to do the same.
We will now have 5 minutes of rebuttals from each of you guys. So we'll start with Milo. You have 5 minutes.
If the movement is, thank you. If the movement, such as it is, I didn't realize there was one, but if Christian nationalism is not yet adequately defined, it's because nobody used it before 2 years ago, which it seems to me to be perfectly reasonable. Trump is not a religious leader in any sense, and you're making a classic mistake of people who don't understand religion, don't understand God, and don't understand their own country when you say, hold Trump up as a kind of moral example. Render unto Caesar. We don't expect that our presidents should be like Jesus because they're not here to do Jesus' job. So, no. It's interesting you talk about women's rights. I mean, Christianity is the... Sorry, I mean... You know, I just don't know how hard to go in, really. I mean, you know, you're talking about the religion that gave women consent in marriage. You're talking about the religion that gave women the right to say no, that elevated them from chattel into human beings. You want to return women to chattel. You want women to be like your wife, passed around town. I'm sorry, but I'm not going to take moral lectures on the rights of women from somebody who treats supposedly their wife in what ought to be a holy sacrament as a communal sex toy. Give me a break. Give me a break. I'm not going to take moral lectures from somebody who, for all intents and purposes, may as well have a fleshlight instead of a wife, who demeans and besmirches her honor, who speaks about a woman who should be treated with the reverence and respect and love that we treat our own mothers with, like she was something you could buy, like she's something that just to get off with, passed around to other men while you watch, flicking yourself off. So forgive me if I decline to take any lectures from you on women's bloody rights. As for gay rights, no thanks. I didn't want them when I was having sex with men, and I don't want them now. Catholicism and Islam are growing, in case you aren't familiar with the world outside these borders. And the reason for that is that everybody sees what a bloody mess we're all in, thanks to globalization, thanks to the information economy, thanks to the kinds of changes that he says are inexorable, because, like a lot of undereducated people, he doesn't have much of a grasp of the world before he was born. I think if you were to glance a little further back, whether it were to ancient Greece or Rome or the Holy Roman Empire, you would see plenty of examples in history, or even, dare I say it, the Weimar Republic. A little bit closer to our own era, in which an era of rampant sexual degeneracy was indeed replaced by some quite stern social rules, to put it mildly. History is replete with examples of what happens when the public gets sick of people like you, fucking everything up, breaking everything apart, and destroying all the things that make society precious, that make relationships work. In fact, if you are to look back in history as far as Greece and Rome, you might say that history is really the story of how people like you, given undue influence and larger platforms than they deserve, continually express views that are so far outside of the mainstream and so out of step with what ordinary people think that you have to be regularly slaughtered, and new governments have to be installed, and coups have to be engaged in, just to keep people like you in line, because otherwise we'd all be dead. So I'm sorry, but I'm certainly not going to take any kind of moral lectures from you on anything. But I've given you a few examples of why everything you just said is complete and absolute nonsense. But let me tell you, if your memory stretches back, and as you're at university, you're an educated person, it should be further than 1980, Yeah, you absolutely can put it back in the box, and we must, and we should, because otherwise America is done.
All right, Destiny, you have 5 minutes for your rebuttal.
I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to respond to. I think it's a little funny that apparently I'm so far outside of what people regularly think, despite the fact that I'm pretty sure I'm giving you a bigger audience than you've had in the past several years post your cancellation. But I see that this is what the dying throes, I guess, of an internet provocateur, as he self-described himself back when you were writing on the alt-right, then when you were writing on Trump. Now I guess you're not writing on guys anymore because apparently you prayed away the gay. So whatever you're doing now. But I won't get into all that. I'll take the high road, despite the fact that you're one of the most obsessed with my wife's vagina gay guys I've ever seen in my entire life, which is very weird, but very strange. I'll kind of reiterate what I said before, I guess. I don't know how long we're going to do this, but yeah, I think that Christian nationalism is largely a joke. I guess you can kind of see that the figures that are proponents of Christian nationalism, like Christian nationalism, are largely jokes. They don't really have any serious positions. They just sit up here trying to provoke. They really have nothing to offer the public, nothing to offer the public discourse, nothing to offer the people that are, I guess, trying to join and leave these movements, because obviously, as we can see online, they are ever fracturing and ever infighting more and more every single day. Yeah.
All right. We'll move on to the questions right now. The person who I will direct a question towards has 5 minutes to respond, and then the opponent has 3 minutes to respond to that. Then the first question is for Milo. As we know, Christianity has a lot of denominations, and even amongst your faith, Catholicism, there are lots of conflicting interpretations of the Bible and other differing opinions. How would you, in your Christian national society, coexist with non-Catholics?
You don't have to, I mean, my patron saint, Louis IX, the only canonized king of France, says that, he knows what's coming already. There must be Elijah, I've been warned about you. Said that it wasn't really proper to debate these kinds of things, and it's better to run somebody through with a sword than to hear them besmirch the faith or whatnot. But if you think that coexistence with Christians is such an onerous and dreadful burden, perhaps you might like to tell the Jews, who seem to quite like it. In fact, Jews and Christians, it seems to me, do best in the sort of situation that you have in the West, with a Christian governing majority and a Jewish minority, so that we don't all get too super serious and up ourselves. And we have some good new interpretations of Mendelssohn now and again. There aren't any conflicting interpretations of the Bible in Catholicism. There is only church teaching, and church teaching is eternal. Unless some pope comes along and decides that, even Francis hasn't done that he's going to rip it all up. Coexisting with Christians is the easiest thing to do in the world. And I can't remember who gave this example, but if you heard footsteps, this is not my analogy, but if you heard footsteps coming up behind you in a dark alley at night, would you feel safer if you knew that it was Dylan Mulvaney or any church-going Christian?
All right. For Destiny, you have 3 minutes now to respond to that.
Can you read the prompt again?
Yeah, sure. As we know, Christianity has a lot of denominations. Even amongst your faith, Catholicism, Milo's faith, there are lots of conflicting interpretations of the Bible. How would your Christian national society coexist with non-Catholics?
Well, I mean, the society that I advocate for is the one that exists today, where people are allowed to worship whatever religion they want. I think that right now, America is superior to a Christian nationalist version of it, because if two different people decide they want to worship two different versions of Christianity, they have the right to do that. Obviously, in Milo's world, I guess the non-Catholics even, I think, would get killed. I don't know where the killing starts and stops for his version of Christian nationalism, or ethnically, I don't know where that starts or stops. I heard the run through the sword thing. Maybe you forgot what you said. I'm not sure what you were doing in the bathroom while we were waiting for you for 20 minutes here, but maybe it's affecting your memory a little bit. But yeah, I think in the United States, I think one of the reasons why the United States works as well as it does is because we've allowed so many different people to come here, worship in the way that we want, or worship in the way that they want, and we should continue to allow them to do so.
40 minutes is a terribly long time to do a line of coke. I was late. I was late for the ordinary reasons that people are late. I was at the hairdresser.
All right, Destiny.
I have the personality I have. Sort of stuck with it now.
Now your question, Destiny. You have 5 minutes to respond to this, and then I'll have 3 minutes to respond to that. Some would argue that a society without religion at its core would devolve into a nihilistic society, deprived of any meaning or purpose. How would you prevent, in your society, non-Christian nationalist governing society, from devolving into a nihilistic, meaningless society?
I think that you have to have something greater than yourself to live for, and I think religion is like a really easy package to give somebody that kind of solves for a lot of those problems. It gives you a nice guide for how to view the world, it gives you a nice guide for how to view your family, it gives you a nice guide for how to live an ethical life, and through that package, people feel like they have something greater than themselves to live for. I don't think it's impossible to have that thing without religion, but I think right now we're very politically fractured as a country, and it makes it really difficult for us to have those things. So for instance, there are certain topics that are hotly contested that I don't think should be. So for instance, all of us should be able to say we're proud to be Americans. That includes progressives, that includes BLM people, that includes people on the left, it includes anybody that might, however far left you go, you should be able to say that. That shouldn't be ground that we cede to people on the right. I think it's kind of a shame that if you see an American flag on somebody's car today, you basically know that they're a conservative because nobody on the left would put that on their car. I think that's an insane proposition. So I think that when we've gotten to this point to where we're so politically divided that people can't even feel proud of their country anymore, if you also take away religion from those people too, then they're kind of aimlessly, I guess, wandering from Twitter to Facebook to YouTube to whatever, just endlessly shitting on each other with no common united purpose. So I think that one of the things we need to work on more than anything else is kind of healing some of the political fracture that exists in this country. I think it's good that we argue with each other, but it's not good that we are relentlessly banning people from every platform so that we're all kind of like gathering in different areas and we're not even able to have conversations with each other in the same reality anymore.
Just look at the societies that Christians build. I mean, earlier he says, you get rid of the First Amendment, and there goes satire. Again, apparently a memory that doesn't stretch back before 1980. Because I think most of the best satirists were Christian Europeans, weren't they? And before that, they were pagans. And, we live in a very Hellenistic kind of a inheritance, and it was just complete and total bollocks. And you've been doing a lot of complete and total bollocks, assigning positions to me that I don't hold, and saying, he wants to murder everyone, he wants to kill all the blacks. No. Look at the societies that Christians build. Look at the things they build. In Catholic theology, there's a thing called the transcendentals, and it's supposedly the things that all souls have in common, that all people yearn for, and which brings us closer to an understanding of God. Now, opinions differ on how many of these things there are, but the core three that everyone agrees on is beauty, truth, and goodness. And it seems to me that if you look at the frescoes in Italy, or you listen to German composers, or look at Dutch painting, that we in Western Christian Europe have done a pretty good job of embracing beauty, truth, and goodness, and also self-sacrifice and sacrifice for love, which is the central image of Christianity. Feuerbach, the philosopher who was not a Christian, did not like Christians at all, said that you can sort of tell what a culture's all about from its religion's kind of central symbol. Ours is Christ on the cross, dying for someone you love. It's Tristan and Isolde. It's all the things that we think are most noble. It's sending people to war to die for their country. All of those values, all those things we love, rest on the image of Christ on the cross. We are good only because we have learned goodness from Christianity. And we can insist in a prideful way that, no, I'm good because I made myself good, because I got there through reason. All right, mate. Just look at the societies that Christians build, and you tell me where you want to live. Is it Abu Dhabi? Is it the Congo? Is it Sparta? Or is it Western Europe, maybe 50 years ago? I know where I'd rather be.
All right, last question for Milo, and you'll have 5 minutes to respond to this, and Destiny will have 3 minutes to respond to that. Some would argue that societies governed under one faith can devolve into tyranny. How would you prevent a Second Inquisition or a Soviet-style dictatorship with them forcing people to proclaim their allegiance to the state and faith?
Well, the Soviets are crap because they failed. I mean, they failed to do what America has accomplished, which is have people thank you for their enslavement and ask for more chains. The Soviet Union never really achieved that, but America has, with prescription drugs and all the other things that people are addicted to. I mean, everybody in this room is dependent on a cocktail, a little package, a little consumer package of things that get them through, whether it's their credit cards or gaming or whatever, passing your wife around. These are the things that sort of get you through life. I'm not terribly concerned about preventing another Inquisition. I think that'd be quite a good idea. Got a pretty bad rap, just like the Crusades does. I mean, you won't hear this from dishonest people who throw accusations at, without really listening to the arguments of their opponents and who aren't educated prior to 1980. But the Crusades were a defensive war. The Inquisition wasn't all that it's been said to be. I don't have an enormous problem with us wandering around and making sure people aren't murdering each other in the womb and making, sitting back and making money off the poor, landlords in Brooklyn. I don't have a terrible problem with that. I don't think that protecting against tyranny is the thing that America should be most concerned with at the moment. I think an urgent, strict, and perhaps stern realignment to a much more conventional morality would make everybody happier. And I don't think that anyone in this room can honestly say that America is better now than it was when most people were going to church or at least God-fearing. It isn't better. And you don't have to be a Christian to participate in a Christian society. Christians are the best of all at letting people in, sometimes too much. Sometimes the people that come in end up messing everything up. You don't have to be a Christian to benefit from a Christian society, and lots of people in this room have done exactly that. But when you take God out and things start to fall apart, you end up in a world nobody wants to live in. And we are in. Sorry?
What year? Like, you're referring to a traditional Christianity. What year are you referring to?
What do you mean?
Like, you're referring to a traditional Christianity.
Oh, well, I mean, if I had my way, I'd go back to about 1200. Lots of propagandists in university departments call it the Dark Ages. Well, this is a conversation for another day, really, but it seems to me it was quite a nice time to live. And I think that you would find, if you care about this kind of thing, if you do care about things above and beyond yourself, if you care about where we go afterwards, if you care about leaving a good legacy, if you care about being good to the people around you, I think a lot more people in 1400 got into heaven each year than do now. And I don't think you have to be a Christian to accept that that's because we're not nice anymore and we're not good to each other. And the reason for that is the failing moral architecture and underpinning of society, which was required by the founders, or this stuff doesn't function, and it's not.
All right, Destiny, you have 3 minutes to respond.
Can you hit me up with that prompt again?
Some would argue that societies governed under one faith can devolve into tyranny. How would you prevent a Second Inquisition or a Soviet-style dictatorship where people have to proclaim their allegiance to the state and faith?
It's kind of a hard question for me to answer because I'm not advocating for Christian nationalism, but I would say obviously we should be allowed to carry on as we are now, where everybody's allowed to choose what God they want to worship, choose the lifestyle they want to live, as long as they're not encroaching on the freedoms of other people. I think you should continue to have the right to do that. So it's my argument in the negative. Also, I do think it's kind of funny that Milo pointed out that everybody in here is addicted to consumerist packaging, when I'm pretty sure that bag is worth like 10 times more than my entire outfit.
It is. It is.
All right, now we will do the last question for you, Destiny, and then we'll go to the Q&A/crossfire. Some would argue that most people are naturally drawn to some sort of faith or belief in a higher power. How would you prevent your society from inevitably becoming a religious society and thus being run by the exact same organizing faith or ideas that you want to try and stop?
I think that the important I think the important thing is for people to have something bigger than themselves to live for. I don't think it has to be religion, but if it was religion, I don't necessarily think that's the worst thing in the world. I think that the defining aspect of the United States is that a lot of people with contradictory ideas can exist within these same geographic borders, governed by the same legal system, voting on the same politicians, and somehow finding a way to make all of that work. I think we've done it for hundreds of years. I think we do it better than any other country on the planet right now, today, not before 1980, not in the 1200s, but today in 2023, I think we have an incredibly diverse country of people, all sorts of creeds, all sorts of ethnicities, all sorts of different types of people that seem to be living together and making it work. I think we have problems right now, like I mentioned earlier, with the political division. And I think that that's a real problem that we need to combat, but I think we need to do it by having honest conversations about what we can do to move forward, not by talking to people that want to look back hundreds or thousands of years to what society used to look like before there was Gucci and hairdressers.
I could live without both if it meant that you would be left on a mountainside somewhere, your parents wondering which god they'd pissed off, which is exactly what would have happened in a pre-Christian civilization to something like you.
Probably would have left the gays there before people like me.
Well, I don't think you can tell when it pops out whether it's going to like cock or not. Maybe if it's your kid, but I'm sure you'll ensure that's the case.
I mean, you know all about kids liking, huh? Isn't that?
Would I? Would I? Tell us more about that. Would I? Because that's a pretty big allegation. Would I?
Would you what?
Would I know about that?
Well, seems like it. Isn't that what you got canceled for?
No, I got canceled for talking about the fact that I was a victim of clerical sexual abuse.
So about like little boys liking, right?
Oh, I see. Okay. Well, yeah.
There you go. You got there eventually. It's okay.
Okay.
I can tell you're coming down right now, but I'll walk you through the rest of my jokes if you need me to.
No, fair enough. Okay. You're bringing it. Fine. It's a shame Father Michael's dead. He would have liked that. I think if I don't know that it makes me an expert on kids liking being raised by a priest, but if you want some comedy lessons afterwards, I'm happy to give you 20 minutes. What was the question? Sorry, I was so bored.
The question was, some would argue that most people are naturally drawn to some sort of faith or belief in a higher power. How would you, Destiny, prevent your society from inevitably becoming a religious society and thus being run by the same organizing faith ideas?
I think it's a bit lazy to say, as people often do, that we now have a kind of alternate sort of progressive religion. I don't think that progressivism really functions like a religion. It's true that when you take God out of things, you don't just sort of, get rid of him in the same way that when you get rid of a king, you don't really get rid of the king. You still are ruled by people that you have no power over. The difference is that in America, you don't know their names because they lurk behind that flag, rubbing their hands and making money off you and getting you addicted to things. You don't know their names, so you can't assassinate them. One reason monarchy is better. I think... sorry, I forgot the question. Oh, it was about how do you prevent it from sliding in? Yeah, I think it's lazy when people say, "Oh, we've replaced kind of one religion with a progressive religion." It's true that when God moves out, that other things move in. You don't just kind of get rid of it and now everyone's happy and now everyone can just be nice to each other. That yearning that you've acknowledged that we all have has got to be satisfied by something. So if you take the Christian God out, something worse moves in because there isn't anything better than that. There isn't anything better than that for organizing society. There isn't anything better than that for teaching people how to behave to one another. There isn't anything better than that objectively, practically, and empirically. So things do move in, but progressivism of the type that he likes doesn't function like a religion because all religions have one thing in common that his political orthodoxy doesn't, and that's salvation and forgiveness. Because there is no forgiveness for people who are cancelled, whether or not they were responsible for what happened to them and were trying to make sense of an abuse experience, or whether they said something that they shouldn't have said. There's no way back, there's no forgiveness, there's no redemption. And that's the thing that all religions, except for this orthodoxy, seem to have in common. So I think it's a bit lazy to say that one religion gets replaced by another, but it is definitely true that you cannot simply chop off the top of the pyramid and expect everything to be fine. Something worse will slither its way up there, and it has.
Thank you guys so much. Let's give everybody, both of them, a round of applause, please. Now we're going to move into the audience Q&A. So if you'd like to ask a question, line up behind me. We'll have somebody hold a mic here, and you're allowed to ask one question. And we'll have probably about 30 minutes this. If we want to go a little longer, we can, but we'll try to keep it to 30 minutes. Yeah, we just need 1 minute to set up the camera, and then we'll be good to go.
All right, so in like a potential Christian nationalist or like theocratic U.S., what would kind of the government policy on smoking indoors be? Is that like permitted?
There's something odd about smoking. Smoking's the only thing that's bad for you that the government doesn't promote.
See, that's kind of what I think.
Yeah, there's something up with that. I feel like maybe like on the low, smoking is really good for you, and they just don't want us to know, and cancer comes from like the TV or something, because there's no
onto something, yeah.
That's something, whatever, you know.
No,
it's bad vibes or the devils or something, but there's something weird about the fact that smoking's the only thing that kills you that the government doesn't subsidize and encourage.
See, yeah, I've always found that to be kind of questionable.
I think smoking is extremely based, and
Oh, yeah.
I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt, certainly in my faith tradition, the early church fathers were very enthusiastic about alcohol, in moderation, of course, although moderation had a slightly different meaning in the 1200s. So I think they would be lighting up the Marlboro right next to you.
All right, well, awesome. Destin, do you have any sort of opinion on that, or?
Well, I kind of like smoking being banned from indoors, I'm going to be honest.
Fair
somebody
enough.
that is
I didn't live it. So.
As somebody that's 34, the older people in here will remember for restaurants we had no smoking sections. They definitely didn't work. I don't mind people smoking, I guess, like outside if they want to smoke, but having to share spaces with just disgusting cigarette smoke, like constantly wafting through the air, especially if you've got kids around and stuff, I think is really disgusting. So I'm glad it's gone from inside.
You sort of get used to it, though. I mean, the only reason to visit Germany after 1945, really, is the fact that you can smoke while you're having a coffee.
There's a lot of drugs you can get used to, but I don't know if you're a good argument in favor of that.
I'm not saying that there's, there are certain things that you can't necessarily argue from first principles convincingly, but nonetheless seem to work better, like monarchy and smoking.
All right, well, fair enough. Thank you, guys.
Hi,
I clawed one person back, you see.
I'm so glad someone brought up smoking because I really needed a Marlboro Red coming in here, and I was like, God, okay.
It's hardcore. I'm a Newport Lights guy.
Oh, okay, right.
Smoke
right,
for the man you want, as
From
was.
John, maybe. But I wanted to ask you, Milo. It's a question on speech, and the first one was, what happened to make America hate again? I was looking forward to that book. I was telling all my friends and family about it, and then it didn't come out.
I kept getting employed by people, but I've written most of it. And I think it's become actually more urgent than ever. There's a particular understanding of hate, which I think that the left fails to make this distinction, probably on purpose a lot of the time. You'll hear Christians sometimes say, hate the sin and love the sinner. What they mean by that is that people are what they do. People are their conscious choices, right? So we shouldn't hate people because they were born a particular ethnicity or gender or whatever, obviously, unless they're French. But what we should instead do is judge them by what they choose to do, right? So people are their actions. And psychology is now catching up with religion. It's, there's no gay men on forms anymore. It's men who have sex with men. So psychology is kind of catching up with this idea that we are what we choose to do. We can hate what people do, the choices they make, and the evil that they perpetuate, without hating them as human beings, as children of God. And I think it's become more urgent than ever that we, I think, rehabilitate hate. And I definitely have been encouraged to get that bloody project finished, because I think it's more urgently needed than ever. We ought to be able to look at something abhorrent and say, I hate it. I hate it powerfully. I hate it passionately. I hate it with every fiber of my being, and I'll fight it, and I'll stop it, and I'll die for it. I'll die to get rid of it. The kind of lifestyle he leads, is the sort of thing that I think it's okay to hate. It's a conscious choice that hurts everyone, that leaves lives ruined, you can see the results. That I think it's okay to hate, although I am commanded to love him as, a fellow man, as a Christian, which, I'm working on.
That brought me to the substance of what I wanted to ask you.
Oh, just on a real quick thing, because you didn't really answer that question. If you want to know when his next book is coming out, you should ask the guy that actually writes them.
I have to believe Milo writes them. I'm a big fan, and they're all fabulous. Anyway.
I think, given that I write about 10,000 words a week on Telegram, it's not beyond the realms of possibility that I might throw a book together once every 2.5 years, which is roughly when I get around to doing them. But you tried.
And it's a great Telegram, almost better than Tucker. Okay, it is better than Tucker. But what I wanted to get to is with blasphemy.
Yeah.
Are blasphemy laws the proper way to have a First Amendment, but also keep it from corrupting itself?
Yes, I think you need a deterrent to remind people what it is that keeps everything held together. And I think if somebody goes out repeatedly, deliberately blaspheming the name of our Lord, you should expect to have your tongue cut out or worse, because that's the thing that keeps everything together. In just the way that Americans get very touchy when flags, graze the floor and stuff like that. It's a perfectly reasonable anxiety to have, because the flag is a sort of, crap proxy for the things that really matter. I think it's perfectly reasonable to have those things sacrosanct, and America does. It just picks stupid shit instead of the right things.
Thank you.
Hello. So Milo, you have identified yourself as an ex-gay, and you have also advocated for conversion therapy.
Yes.
And making it to where it is more, I guess, acceptable to the media, or presenting a more positive light of conversion.
I don't much care if journalists like it or not. I just want to save souls, but go on.
Yeah. So I just wanted to know how you planned on making it to be seen as more positive in the media, just because a lot of studies have shown that conversion therapy is traumatic for...
No, they haven't. If you recall, even the most left-wing... that ridiculous... I mean, okay, the strongest argument you have is that Biden, the nuclear tranny, the one whose job was dealing with spent rods, who used to steal luggage from there was that lovely, was it a Nairobi woman? What was she? A fashion designer. That tranny your first clue was he's wearing women's clothes. Maybe not somebody you want around nuclear material. Your strongest argument is he went through conversion therapy, but of course on film he said it worked and he liked it. So the testimony is a bit unreliable in this area, and I think most of the reason for that is that it doesn't work all the time. And the majority of it doesn't work most of the time, actually. The best that most people can hope for is celibacy. And I think that disappointment is what drives a lot of the negative testimony afterwards. I think that it works in conversion therapy's favor that it's hated. If you find it ridiculous for me to say that, that it's a good thing that works, there isn't a person in this room who can honestly say, the press treated Donald Trump totally fairly in 2016. Even if you were on the other side, everybody now agrees, as sure as, they agree on the color of the sky.
Right.
Well, the first,
but
I'm getting there. The first time that something was given that treatment, the treatment that Trump's had, was in the first episode of political correctness in the 1990s. So in the 1990s, there was a sort of brief flash of political correctness that was quite quickly put down by counterculture. It came back with a vengeance later. We now live in it. But in that first brief flash of political correctness, that's when you had the old ladies with the big hair on TV saying that, Marilyn Manson causes massacres at school, which I find, just as ridiculous as people who say that video games cause school shooters, just as ridiculous as people who say that.
Thank you.
Well, I'm trying to. Not everything has a two-word answer.
But I think it does. All I just want to know is how you plan on. Like,
Well, if you knew the answer, you wouldn't be asking me.
Well, yeah, but you
I think
just
we're done.
keep
Thank
going
you.
in circles.
Hi, so Destiny, I just want to say I'm a longtime viewer and fan.
Hey, what's up?
Nice to see you in person. As far as all the shit you give about your wife, threesomes are base, dog, so have your fun. Anyways, to my question. You guys seem to be implying that under Christian nationalism, things would get better. Well, he does. Things get better. I assume that means like crime and things like that. How do you reconcile that with the fact that a lot of the prison population is very low atheist counts and dominantly Christian, and a lot of countries like Japan and over in Europe are less religious, and they seem to be more pleasant places to live. So if either of you guys have something to contribute on that, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I think that religion probably has a really complicated interaction with a person's life in a way that could either predispose you towards crime or could not predispose you, or predispose you against crime, or be a protective factor against crime. So, for instance, if you grew up in a religious family where religion is like a centerpiece of the family, but it's also built out to where you've got a strong mother and father, or two parents in the household, you've got a good community of people that also worship. In these types of situations, I'm sure that religion probably functions as some kind of protective factor against committing crime and whatnot. But if you look at prison populations, where people go and they eventually convert, or a lot of people can be violent and still, wear a rosary, which you're not supposed to do, or wear a chain or something that has a cross on it. I think sometimes you can scapegoat religion to do horrible things. I think that it's probably just depends on your engagement with your religion. I kind of view it as an instrument, a tool. You can either do good things through it, like the unbelievable amount of charitable givings and community involvement that churches have, or you can do horrible things with it, like people flying into buildings or going on mass shootings or what have you.
Did you say you're not supposed to wear rosaries?
Have
you never been to Italy?
No, but I was a Catholic for 16
Okay.
years, and wearing a rosary was a
Very good.
big no-no. We got in big trouble in school when we did that. But
The answer to your question is race. The reason that there's no crime in Japan is it's entirely racially homogenous and wealthy. That's the answer. The reason that there's a lot of crime in this country is that America messed up emancipation.
What races commit the crimes?
I think we know. But there's a reason for that. There's a reason. Well, let me get to it. You can clip the good thing.
Pussyfooting about it. Just fucking say it, you coward.
All right. This country messed up emancipation. What happened in the UK was that, and it feels gruesome to us now to speak in these terms, but property owners, sorry to say, were compensated for their losses. To put it, in those terms, in a sense, emancipation in Europe was a kind of eminent domain, where even if people wanted to grumble about it, they couldn't really say too much because they had got the market value for their house so that the railway could be built. In America, they dragged it on for generations. They didn't do that, and then through a combination of incompetence and malice, blacks and whites were set against each other in this country, with the result that there is now a permanently grievance-focused 13% of the population. I mean, maybe 1% of the black Americans don't hate everything and everyone, but the rest of them are predisposed toward antisocial behaviors because they were never welcomed into the pact. They were never properly welcomed into the American deal. They were never properly given a seat at the table, and they were never properly welcomed in, with the result that they immediately, after emancipation, because emancipation was messed up, started voting with their race. They never were welcomed into the American deal, into the pact. They never bought into the values, and they never participated in the process of being American citizens. So they didn't feel bound by the obligations that other Americans had towards one another, like jury trials should be based on the facts and not on whether he's black. So as a result of things that were done to them a very long time ago, black America is now in a situation where there's sort of permanently petulant child constantly lashing out at a mixture of real and imagined grievances. And the answer to your question about crime is simply that. It's race. It's got nothing to do with religion.
Just an interesting addition to that. Two researchers, Whitehead and Perry, I didn't know this stat would come in handy, but black Americans are actually the largest ethnic group in the United States to support some form of Christian nationalism, which I think is really funny after all of that.
Yeah, and there are reasons for that. I mean, you've got people who look. It's mostly to do with where black people were and who was there too. So in the South, whether it's Georgia, which is traditionally English, or Tennessee, which is more Scots-Irish, you've got more enthusiastic and more Anglican and more religion that stuck more from basically the Anglosphere versus some of the Dutch places. There's a very good book called American Nations, which kind of explains, by Colin Woodard, that sort of explains the different character of the various chunks of America. The main reason Black America it remains somewhat religious, although the church going doesn't necessarily translate into behavior or social attitudes these days.
Why not?
Well, because they're heretics, because they go to churches that are completely and utterly bonkers, because they don't go to preachers who tell them about God. They're Pentecostals or Crystal Methodists or some other kind of nonsense. The reason that they're not behaving as Christians is because they're not really Christians. But the main reason that they are religious at all is just where they were and how they were when everything came to an end.
The funniest thing is I actually just made that up. I was seeing if he would actually try to talk his way through that, but I totally made that up. Thanks, Milo.
Well, thank you both.
It doesn't surprise me for a very simple reason, which is that it was black voters who resisted the proposition in California about gay marriage. It's not a ridiculous thing. It's not a gotcha to say that blacks are socially conservative. You can make some of the same arguments about Hispanics. Now, the kind of Catholicism they practice is all mixed up with the hoodoo, voodoo, bruja nonsense. But it's not in any way a ridiculous thing to say, given that in California, of all places, it was black voters who stopped gay marriage passing. I mean, it's just not a particularly peculiar thing to say. Wouldn't surprise me at all. In fact, one of the reasons that they have to work so hard to get black people into universities is that they don't teach anything that black people actually care about, and one of those is God.
What else do they not care about?
Property rights, bicycle chains, I don't know.
What happens when you die?
That's a good question.
It's a great question. I'd like an answer.
You might find out soon if this event carries on its current trajectory.
Well, one of us
I just
will,
want your
guess.
personal opinion.
I have no idea, to be honest. It's a thing I don't concern myself with. The way that I view it is that we've got one life on this planet. We've got a bunch of people on this planet. There's going to be people that are come after us. I feel like it's good to kind of put all your efforts into making this life as good as you can for yourself and the people around you. If you want to fixate on an afterlife or wonder what comes after, I think that's fine. But don't make too many sacrifices for a guaranteed life here for a hypothetical, afterlife tomorrow.
In all fairness,
I think we can all see the results.
Who you were when I came here, so just out of curiosity, are you an atheist?
Yeah, I would say so, yeah.
What is nothing?
That's a
What is
very
that?
challenging question.
A lot of people I have talked to about it say that nothingness is black, right? But that's something, isn't it?
So the challenge of the question is actually in the words that you use to ask the question betray how complicated a question is. So for instance, when you say, what is it like to experience nothingness? Or what is a thing? What is nothingness? Well, the question presupposes a subject that can observe the nothingness. When you ask what is something, you're saying what is it like to observe something? Or what is it like for somebody to observe something? But obviously if there's nothing, there's not an observer there to observe it. So the question is a bit meaningless. I can't answer what it's like for somebody not to exist and then for that non-existent person's subjective experience of nothingness to be. There's no way for me to meaningfully answer the question.
There's no way for any of us to answer that.
I've been
question,
retired too long to understand that.
The answer has
but
been delivered to us a long time ago.
Don't people?
I'm sorry, he went 3 seconds without talking, so when you're finished.
Don't people equate nothingness and black because of darkness and you can't see things at night? It's pretty simple, isn't it?
It's who? What?
Sorry.
Okay. Anyways.
It's the same reason that up and down have the associations they do with good and evil, because things grow up and die down. It's pretty simple, right?
Destiny,
go ahead.
both of you guys have been calling each other terrible names and being real rude to each
called
other
him
all
names.
day.
It's
To be
It's
clear,
his
only in
behavior
retaliation
I
to him.
don't
I came
like.
here to play nice tonight. I didn't know he was going to be such a degenerate.
No,
well, I know he's a degenerate, but not in these ways.
No, you didn't.
I just want
I
both of
didn't
you
call
to
him any
know.
names. It's his behavior I don't like. It's
Well,
the
yeah,
way
yeah.
that he
I'm
passes
sorry, go ahead.
his
It's
wife
the last time
around.
I'm sharing a stage with this clown. Go ahead.
Okay, that's fine.
Well,
I guess that
No more charitable donations to this guy. We can leave that to the 5,000 view ministry stuff he does on YouTube now.
All right,
What were you
okay.
saying?
every one of us is a sinner, and you can
True.
be saved.
Oh,
the
thank
Lord
you.
gave his only son that each one of us can be saved. That's
Thank
all
you,
I have
sir.
to say.
And it's precisely that. Although I intensely and feverishly despise your life choices. That's precisely the difference between us, because I will go home and pray for you, and you will go home and bitch about me on the internet, and that's exactly the difference between
You were
us.
literally complaining about me in the
Exactly the
bathroom
difference between
30
us.
minutes ago, Milo. We can see your Telegram. It's public. You know that, right?
What are you talking about? I just separated the des from the tiny. The des, that's all I did. Was I complaining from the bathroom?
Milo, if Christianity is what's going to save us from these mass shootings, since you said that we've turned away from Christianity and that's why the bad things in the news are happening, why do we have so many Christian mass shooters?
Who? The Christian mass shooters? Who? Name one.
The University of Texas shooting, it was a Catholic.
Okay, so
We didn't think you'd actually have an example.
I have a list.
neither did I, because the two problems with this. Okay, we live in a Christian country and in a Christian tradition, so everybody kind of like casually calls themselves something, regardless of how committed they were. And I think I heard somebody say, "Where did he go to mass?" And I think what he was getting at was this somebody who goes and listens to the gospel in church every Sunday? Pretty sure it wasn't. Everybody kind of like loosely calls themselves Christians in Christian countries, at least until very recently. But aren't there more obvious common denominators between all these shooters than religion? For instance, antidepressant drugs. For instance, ready access to firearms. For instance, maybe even you might say their race and their gender. There's stuff that's like much more of them have in common. Way before you get to Christianity, no? Like 7 things they have in common, more than they have Christianity in common, don't you think?
The demographics follow the demographics of the United States. So I don't think there's a common denominator.
So what?
I don't think there's a common denominator between race, gender, whatever.
No, I say the demographics have nothing to do with whether someone's on prescription drugs or not.
What? How many mass shooters were on prescription drugs?
Literally all of them.
No.
Aside from, yeah. I mean,
No.
you can't name one that wasn't on something. I mean, I don't have the list with me. I can certainly pull it up if you want. Every mass shooter has been on something.
That is false.
Dylan-
Also, I think
Dylan
it's
Roof was
disgusting
on
that
it.
you came here to our state talking about our children that died in a mass shooting as a political point. That is absolutely vile.
I live here. And I go to church here. Excuse me, ma'am. So pipe down, because I, as a resident of, I have just as much.
Hey, I think you need to pipe.
Excuse me, I have just as.
Pipe down.
As somebody who lives here, I have just as much standing as you do to talk about the dangers in churches and schools, because I go to church every Sunday. Do you? Because if you don't, I'm at more risk than you are.
No, you aren't.
No, you aren't. What do
You are not.
Why am I not at more risk than you are? Can I have an argument instead of petulance? No, I can't. You're leaving.
Petulance.
Okay, very good.
Where was the petulance?
Oh, that was indicated by my sarcastic imitation. No, you aren't. That's
I'm
petulance.
talking.
Then please, where do you go to church, Mom?
I don't go to church.
No, you don't. So if the shootings have happened like quite a lot in churches and synagogues lately, right? Whether it's a right-winger, a left-winger, they're black, they're white, whether they're targeting Christians, they're targeting Jews. Seems to happen quite a lot in places of religious worship lately. Do you go to synagogue or temple?
No, but
Do you go to a mosque?
Do you go to school?
Do you
because
go
it
to-
happens at schools a lot.
Yeah, I'm in one now, but you evidently didn't go here.
I
Wait, are
grew
we in a
up in
school or are we in a
Tennessee.
convention center right now?
I don't know where we are.
Thank you.
I thought we were at a
The
university.
answer to your question is go to Wikipedia.
Did they
look
not
up
let
no
us on
true
the
Scotsman,
university?
okay? All the Christian shooters that were mass shooters weren't real Christians, okay? Apparently that's the answer.
Well, I think if you look at the manifestos, you can see what motivates them, and in many cases, it is racially motivated. There's no point denying it. But I don't recall anybody drawing on early church fathers to justify their massacre of children. Not
Would
for
you
a
say,
whi-
would
not
you
for
say
a while
that there is
anyway.
an ethnic bend to Christian nationalism?
Yes.
Okay, so then,
And I think
so then
it's-
who is to say that a mass shooter that cites ethnicity for an inspiring factor for why there's a mass shooter, like why would you not say that Christian nationalism might play a role into that?
I think it's a pity that there does seem to be a sort of racial inflection to Christian nationalism. It's not a dimension of it that I share or care too much about. In my previous life, obviously, I loved and married and settled down with somebody who was not of my own race. And if the people that you choose to hang out with when you don't have to don't establish your racial attitudes, I don't know what would to anyone's satisfaction. So I don't know. I don't love the fact that most of these Christian nationalists seem to be young white guys. But by the same token, I've seen black conservatives, and I think we'll stick with what we have for now. certainly I do think it's a responsibility of older and better educated Christians and these guys, confessor priests, to remind them that there's no skin color.
I'm just curious, for
in
you
heaven.
personally, if you could choose between 10 million Mexican Catholics coming into this country or 10 million atheist Norwegians.
Well, I'm very racist against Spanish people, so you've put me in a bit of a bind. I like blacks, I like whites, I like Asians. I don't love Spaniards, so you put me in a bit of a bind. But I would have to come down on the side of Christians no matter where they're from.
Well, that's good, okay.
Oh, okay. I was having fun. This is a question for Mr. Atentacumpo. I was raised Catholic.
I don't know what that is. You're going to have to explain your Bob. I'm sorry.
No, though I don't really know how to pronounce your last name. I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with Greek. My question is, I was raised Roman Catholic. I attended both Latin masses and English language masses up until my sophomore year of college, which was very recently. I have also been a homosexual my entire life. I've been attracted to men. I have had exclusively sex with men. All of my relationships have been with men. And I'm very aware of the fact that these homosexual relationships are a sin according to Catholic doctrine. And I'm wondering if you have practical advice for overcoming these things. I'm not interested in whether or not they're sinful.
I mean, are you sincerely...
I'm completely sincere. I mean...
Because I will have a real conversation with you. It's just that there's been a particular tone this evening, you know, so...
I have been very ironic with you and sarcastic, but this is a completely sincere question.
You can understand why I'm asking.
I totally understand. I mean, we could talk in the bathroom if you'd like, but...
Definitely
I'm interested
not.
in actual practical applications. I'm not interested in whether or not
Quite a short refractory
ethical.
index from mocking someone to saying you want to have sex with them. All right, look, what the church teaches is not that homosexuality in large part is a cluster of symptoms to early childhood trauma. Whether that trauma is having no male role model to look up to, whether it's the failure to form platonic attachments with, male authority figures, there's a bunch of things that can happen, or sexual assault. You're not responsible for what happens to you, but you are responsible for what you do afterwards and what you do with that. And
But I'm looking for practical advice, day-to-day things.
Sure. Well, then you should. The easiest. The first
Stop
thing.
Men, isn't that like the only thing you can say? I mean, what else can you do?
Easier said than done. as my damp pillows will attest. I think that the first thing. Look, I'm going to assume that you're being serious, and I'm not going to give you any sort of flippant, frivolous kind of day-to-day whatever. I practiced mortification when I was getting myself out of that. I used hot oil because it's extremely annoying and lasts a really long time, and it kind of like kills any sort of sexual appetite. But the first step before any of that is to figure out why you ended up like this in the first place. Because you weren't born this way. That's sort of 1980s propaganda. There's no gay gene. They would have found it by now. We have mapped the genome. It's not there. Something was done to you, or something was not provided for you. And one or both of those things happened, which produced these feelings. And if you want to get right with God, the first step is to find out what it was, because you might not know and you might not remember. The best place to go for that is a therapist who was trained by any of the sort of descendants of the Joseph Nicolosi school. So Joe Nicolosi is kind of like the sort of godfather of, they call it reparative therapy now. And his son is still active, and they still train therapists. And within quite a short space of time, they will help you to find an answer. And there are a variety of therapies that look to the observer extremely funny, that nonetheless do work. And I'll let you discover what some of those are for yourself. But there's a path out if you want it. Almost everybody can reach celibacy if they are sincerely committed to it. And the numbers vary from like 10 to 20% people who successfully manage to enter into a relationship with a woman, have an active sexual life, and have children. somewhere between 1 in 10 and 1 in 5
I'm
gay,
sorry,
gay
is
people are able to do that.
celibacy the best case scenario for a homosexual?
For a lot of people, yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Vosh.
Same joke.
Again,
Hey, Destiny. So you had a great talk with the Muslim extremist Quarantos about how his great audio quality and good takes about how Muslim nations are greater than Christian nations. I want to ask Milo how you would implement Christianity when they are barely holding on to their legitimacy, when Islam is gaining traction and while Christianity is taking D-list celebrities that take cock, well, at least of 20 years ago, or 20 minutes ago.
Okay, I'll ignore the last bit. Catholicism and Islam are both growing, and the reason for that seems to be that people correctly intuit that if a belief system or a club, a society, a way of life kind of demands nothing of you, then it's probably not worth very much. So people are very, it's one of the reasons that Protestants are so kind of ideologically promiscuous. You know, church hopping happens when all you have to do is just show up, listen to a preacher for 45 minutes, you know, listen to some nice music and go home. People don't get very much out of it because there's not really much to get out of it. Islam and Catholicism are quite demanding, and they ask a lot of their followers. In the world we live in today, it's no surprise that they're both growing. You say implement like it's, you know, the death penalty or something. What I would suggest is that America rediscovers its founding principles, which are not untrammeled freedom. Freedom of religion in America was designed to avoid Protestant wars. It wasn't so Muslims could take public office. And that should be reversed, and it should be against the law. If you live in America and you're a servant of the people in America, you should be a church-going Christian. It ought to be a rule. But something happened in 1776 that I don't think was necessary, and it was probably a mistake, when that ugly sedition occurred. Instead of just throwing out the king, America threw out religion as well, dissociating it from the state, guaranteeing freedom of religion, which is intended just between Protestant denominations, but of course would always blossom out. And then it sort of enshrined the right to commit various infractions against the Ten Commandments, including the First Amendment. I think if you want to sort of reinstitute things, all you really need to do is to return to an understanding that none of this stuff works without Christianity. And one of the ways to communicate that would probably be to reestablish maybe Presbyterianism or Episcopalianism, probably the Episcopal Church, I would guess, since that's the one that most of the presidents seem to go for. It's the church Tucker goes to. It's the National Cathedral in Washington. Most of the elites in the country are pretty happy with Episcopalianism. You know, you get back home to the real religion eventually, but let's start with that. It seems to me that that should be quite quickly reestablished so that all public bodies operate not only in the name of America, but in the name of God. And then if you want to be elected to any kind of public office, you have to be Christian.
Well, how would they implement that? Or you don't like the word implement because it sounds like you're forcing them, but it seems like average Americans don't even care about their Christianity and don't even relate their morals to how good their lives are.
Well, people know if you're a Christian. I mean, they know if you show up to church. There's a sort of only when you take God out do you need like social credit scores, because no one's really like paying any attention to each other. So you have to kind of have this like weird Orwellian technological horror show where technology tries to piece together information about a person to figure out if they're okay or not. Everybody in your parish knows if you go to church or not. If you run for public office and you don't go to church, you're not eligible. And then the onus, you know, falls to you to prove that you are what you purport to be. That doesn't seem to me to be a problem. Anyone who goes to a regular local parish will know that. If you're a Christian, people know. People know when you go to church, and it's a gentler and more sophisticated, and I think more normal form of kind of social currency and social capital than the the horrific Chinese version.
Well, that sounds almost as feasible as communism, so I appreciate you and good luck with your future endeavors.
All right, boys, I'm going to try to ask two pointed questions to try to get some dubs for y'all. So, Milo, at some point you mentioned Dutch paintings. It immediately made me think of the Calvinists around the time period that you're kind of advocating to go back for. And their biggest thing that they advocated for was they were very business oriented, but their simplicity and modesty were the values that they valued the most. How would you kind of reconcile in a transition to a society that has a Christian nationalist government, the American values of excess and stuff like that, to the modesty Christian value that's
I
really
get what you're
important?
going. I don't think those were the American values until very recently. I mean, for the first 250 years of this country, precisely that kind of modesty obtained. Look at the 1950s. You've got there's an ethos of humility, of service, of family orientation. Right? America is kind of a Calvinist country. I mean, you go to Catholic churches; they don't feel like Catholic churches in Europe. They don't feel like it's certainly not like Italy. But it's nothing like France. It's nothing like the UK. America, wherever you go, it is kind of Calvinist. There's a sort of over-earnestness. There's a sort of flavor of slight humorlessness sometimes. Sort of taking everything very, very deeply seriously and being incredibly wounded by it, and taking everything just like everything is the apocalypse. And it's a very Calvinist kind of flavor to things, and it's why? Because so many areas in America that now hold the reins of prestige culture are Dutch. That's why. Because they come from precisely the place you're saying. So I don't think that American values were ever really of excess. I think that's something that has emerged. It's something that's been thrust on Black America as well. These sort of very degenerate, self-destructive social attitudes that pop up in the music and the culture, all the rest of it. I don't think there's anything particularly American about that. America's basically British. And with that dash of Calvinism in from the Dutch up top, that's basically been the sort of central conflict of America. And the soul of America, even after the Civil War, kind of remained basically, vaguely, mostly Anglophone, mostly Anglo, although Americans don't like to think of it like that. But that Calvinist attitude, which also, by the way, gives rise to Puritanism and purity tests and cancel culture, is the thing that obtains in the Dutch areas, the Yankeedom, New York. None of this has anything really to do with excess. Excess is a modern phenomenon that's driven by runaway capitalism and by a small group of people highly motivated to wreck the place.
Thanks, Mel. I appreciate that. This one's for Stephen over here. So in your talk today, you mentioned sort of like America's need a return to spirituality that can kind of lift people up from addictions to their phones, stuff like that, that can kind of, not a religious center to keep people on a moral level, but it almost sounds like you're arguing for like a re-faith in the American process. I know that you're big on canvassing. I drove some minions to your canvassing in Georgia. What would be your answer to like first steps to try to regain people's political faith and stop the fracturing too much?
Yeah, I think one of the huge things that we have right now is political fracturing. And I think the political fracturing has made it impossible for anybody to be proud of the country because like even things that we do that I think are amazing, like become hardcore politicized. So this is a risky one in Tennessee. I don't know how much the audience is mind, but like I would consider, for instance, like the development of the mRNA vaccines. I think that is like a championing of the American project. That was capitalism at its best, with Trump doing the warp speed thing to use the government to incentivize like a company that was working with other companies all over the world to engineer and create a vaccine in like less than 1 year for a novel virus. That's something that I would hope that like every American would be like, that's really cool that we did that we were able to do it that fast. I know Trump wants to take credit for it, and I think he should get some credit for it because I think the warp speed was a good idea. He guaranteed money for those companies to take the risk to make those vaccines. But because we're so hardcore politicized, we can't take credit for that. It becomes a political issue where, even the political party that existed under Trump now hates the vaccine, and then liberals have their thing with the vaccine. It feels like every single, the intervention that we did with Ukraine, I think was really amazing. I think the fact that Ukraine was a country that looked like it had no opportunity whatsoever to stand up to Russia, and with NATO intelligence, with US leadership in NATO, I think we've done something amazing there, but we've helped them largely on their own. I mean, it's not US lives that are being lost, not to take any credit from Ukraine. That's something that I think is really amazing that America's done. Even things like Bush's programs to fight AIDS in Africa, or Bill Gates, funding for malaria in Africa. All of these things, I think, are really amazing projects that America's done, that all of us, irrespective of our political differences, should be able to look and go, oh, that's really cool. I'm American. America did that, and I feel really proud of it. But nobody does, because instead these are like all political pawns to use in our little arguments on Twitter and stuff for us. So to return to your question, I don't like anybody that says a return to anything, because it feels a bit fantastical. I don't know of any society that's ever like said, okay, well, we're going to undo the last 50 years of progress and go back to this thing. I don't think it really works that way, especially with how much technology has changed everything. So we need to be forward-looking, not looking into the past. And I think that forward-looking thing, it has to be with less division, because the more divided we are, the more impossible it is for us to kind of all collectively like work and vie towards one particular thing, which in my hope would be like the American project, however differently we all view it.
I just have a quick follow-up question to that. So
Yeah, go
a
for
lot
it.
of the wins that you mentioned were not specifically American government wins. Like a lot of those are private companies, like the mRNA vaccines. Like, yeah, it's a great marvel of science, but a lot of that were, they got funded, but it was private companies that did that. It wasn't the American government that made it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, but those companies existed in America for a reason. And a lot of the public research that had already been done on like the mRNA process, that stuff spans back to, I think, like the 80s, where people were starting to do that. So we do a lot of public funding for general research. And then we had private American companies. But you're right, it wasn't just the American government. But I mean, I'm an American. As Americans, we hate the government, right? I know in Tennessee you guys hate the government, right? Yeah, I'm not saying that like the American government has to do it. I'm saying America as a country has to do it. And sometimes that can be our biggest companies. But, like I said before, like it feels like now everybody fucking hates our biggest company. Nobody likes Facebook. Nobody likes ExxonMobil. Nobody likes fucking any huge American company. We all like shit on our companies, and those are like some of the largest things we built as Americans. And it's like, well, fuck. Like, yeah, I don't know. It just feels like we're in an area where, I'd be super curious. I did this with Adam Sosnick when I was on his podcast last. Like, when you ask people, like, what are you proud to be an American for? That's a really difficult question to ask a lot of people. I think when I ask my parents, like, I'll get things like, like winning the Cold War. Or stuff from like decades and decades ago. And I was like, okay, well in the past, like, I should be able to say in the past 5 years, really. But like at least in the past like 10 or 20 years, like what are you proud to be an American? People on the left will complain about colonialism and white supremacy, and people on the right, well now all they complain about is trans people. But like it just feels like we have nothing that we can kind of all say like, okay, yeah, it sucks that we fought, but like in '69 we went to the moon. Like we don't have our moon launching now. Oh, I guess aside from the vaccines, I'll give one more example so I'm not too partisan. Elon Musk. I hate that guy, okay? I really do. But Tesla's really fucking cool, and so are the rockets. SpaceX is really cool. Having the rocket come back to the planet is a really fucking cool thing. When we first saw that, I don't know how many people watched that first stream. That was like the coolest fucking thing ever. And this was after we were shipping our astronauts over, I think, to China or Russia to fly on their fucking shuttles to get up to the International Space Station. But that's something like you can't be proud of, because now if I say like, I don't like Elon Musk, but like SpaceX and Tesla are pretty fucking cool. That's like a political talking point now. It's like, wait, you support the white supremacist guy that wants to, bring people like Milo and me back to Twitter? Like, yeah, I don't know. Just the political division makes it impossible for us to have like this shared idea of what it means to be American and what we should be proud of. And I think we need to work on getting that back.
I think people like stuff that's good and they don't like stuff that's bad. People don't uniformly hate the government even here. I mean, people know that there are militarized police forces that are a bit sinister. They also know that the local sheriff, if you get pulled over by the sheriff, you're probably okay because they're mostly reasonable people. They're able to distinguish between the government doing its job really well, which doesn't happen very often anymore, and the government doing its job really badly, which happens almost everywhere. And the success of private enterprise in this country is because the government failed. It's not a sign of success, it's a sign of failure. The success of SpaceX tells us only that NASA is more interested in giving Muslims self-esteem about scientific achievements in the Muslim world, where they still think that nuclear reactors are powered by genies and fairies. That's what NASA spent its time doing under Obama. No shit, you can't get to the moon anymore. Taking the shackles off private corporations so they can rape and ruin us all is, of course, going to produce some interesting and impressive economic phenomena. But more often than that, it's going to produce horrors. The vaccine is a horror. This sort of thing. I mean, I don't know how to respond to somebody who thinks that the vaccine is a good idea. My communist friends no longer think that it was a good idea.
I mean, you could try with evidence. I know that it's painful for you, but...
The evidence of what? The fact that the most vaccinated countries in the world, the ones where everyone's dropping dead, the fact that it was never a problem in the first place, the fact that we should only ever have asked the old people to maybe stay in for a few months. I mean, you talk about Orwellian tyrannical horror. You have nothing to fear from Christians, but you have a lot to fear from people who want to lock you, screw you into your houses, and force medicine into you until you can, and then tell you can't go back to work otherwise. That's not private enterprise. That's a drug cartel. And that's what America has, because America hasn't really had properly functioning capitalism for quite some time. It's got nepotism. It's got all kinds of deeply, deeply corrupt late stage sort of intertwining of government and business. And all of that is a sign of the failure of government, not the success of America.
Thank you all so much.
Hey, Milo. If Christian nationalism were to succeed, God willing, what measures would need to be taken to make sure it wasn't subverted? You mentioned that in order to run for public office, you need to be Christian, but like what policies specifically would need to be taken in order to make sure Christian nationalism wasn't subverted in America?
I mean, you can't know another man's heart, so you can never know if somebody is all that they claim publicly to be. But when we elect politicians, it kind of doesn't matter. That's really a matter for their consciences and for God, because if somebody looks like a Christian, acts like a Christian, goes to church and says Christian things on TV, passes Christian laws, invites Christians to the White House when they get elected. I mean, Trump, I'm under no illusions about Trump being some kind of religious leader. Give me a break. This is not somebody who can lead a kind of authentic religious revival in politics. No. But he was very good to Christians, first president to show up for the March for Life, first president to invite the number of evangelical preachers that he just was, and so on and so forth. I think that's good enough. That's fine. So as long as somebody is, doing all the stuff they're supposed to be doing, what they do in their private life, if they're elected officials, as long as they are not letting those values spread into the way they govern, we can afford, at least at first, to be relatively lenient about. Later, who knows? But no, I mean, if somebody, like I say, if somebody acts and governs and passes laws like a Christian, I think people will know if they're Christian.
Right. No, I was asking about like what those actual policies would be after those Christians were elected, like to make sure that it wasn't subverted in the future.
Well, I see. Well, so it works relatively well in Europe when you have an established church, right? So the head of state is also the head of, whatever heretical sect of Christianity you're under. But no, I mean, so America kind of spiraled out of control in about 300 years, but most of these European countries were stable for 1,000, 2,000. It worked pretty well when you have an established church, so that government does things in the name of the monarch and in the name of God, right? So I know that this is a sort of a slightly alien concept in this country by design, but things kind of work better when people are reminded, as my friend acknowledged, that there's something greater than themselves. And those public rituals, whether it's royal weddings or the fact that everything important that happens in a nation's life happens in a church, it sort of has an effect on the country. It has a really powerful effect on change for change's sake. People are much less likely to do stuff like that. And if you look at sort of where the great dramas happen of particular countries, America, it's the courtroom, right? We come to know ourselves in America through court cases. We don't talk about abortion, we talk about Roe v. Wade. The way that we know there's a problem with Black America is the OJ trial, right? That's when white America realizes, oh, we have a problem here. America's kind of forum for national dramas is legalistic, it's in the courtroom. And that's because it's wrenched down from heaven, and it's wrenched down from the monarch, and it's wrenched down from anything ineffable, anything untouchable, anything aspirational. It's much more easily corrupted. So I think reestablishing the church as making America's official national religion and language and culture to be Western European Christian, it seems to have worked quite well for Europe. And I don't know if you can really ask of any civilization that lasts more than 2,000 years.
Real quick question. Would you outlaw usury in the United States?
Personally, if I stumbled into Pennsylvania Avenue as president, it would probably be my first executive order.
Thank you.
Hello, Milo. When you were the champion of campus free speech in 2015, 2016, I was a big fan, and I appreciate your work. And as a fellow convert to the Catholic Church, I was really encouraged to hear about your interest in the faith. But I have some genuine and serious concerns about some of your comments that you've stated today. there is a strong tradition in the church of teaching dating back centuries that culminated in the Second Vatican Council in the document Humani Dignitatis, that squarely condemns some of the things that you attribute to this vision of Christian nationalism as heresy. Could you, and I'll closely paraphrase because I don't have photographic memory, so this infallible ecumenical council stated that in its document proclaiming proclaiming religious freedom, that the truth can only proceed or succeed by the merits of its own truth and not by coercion. So could you comment on these teachings?
Absolutely. And look, absolutely. And nobody's suggesting that we're going to be instituting a Gestapo or anything like that, because that's an Enlightenment atheistic kind of thing. It's entirely, as you will know, necessary for our salvation that we have the freedom to choose the wrong thing as much as we have the freedom to choose the right thing. But that doesn't mean that in Christian countries there aren't incentives in the tax system, laws against certain things. Though we must, for our salvation, have the freedom to choose the right over the wrong, that doesn't mean that in a Christian country that murder should be legal. It doesn't mean that abortion should be legal. We must have laws and rules in order to have a functioning society that exist as much to circumscribe the proper behavior of those citizens as it does to, ideally safeguard their souls. So no, I completely agree with you that people must have as much freedom as is practicably possible, but the Catholic Church is a very prescriptive religion that requires a lot from people, and the rules that it lays down for followers aren't optional. And in those countries that have had explicitly Catholic governments and monarchs in the past, that attitude has tended to proliferate out into lawmaking. So I agree with you on coercion to a point. I don't think we should be frog marching people to church or we shoot them. No one's ever suggested that. But we should make more things illegal that aren't illegal right now.
Destiny kind of mentioned this earlier, but I wanted to get some more expansion on it. With the effects of globalization and our culture, particularly religiously, a part of America's identity is kind of being this melting pot of the world. How would we realistically impose religion nationwide without cutting off the American people from the rest of the world? Present day, how it is, we're so interconnected, and how is it plausible to cut us off and mandate a religion when the rest of the world is working toward a more diverse religious scene, and wouldn't doing this essentially kind of create a border between the US and the rest of the world?
I thought that was for you.
Wait, was that for him?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, yeah, that's what I thought.
I'm sorry. I'll just give you an example. I would have to look up the reference, but I think it was about 10 years ago, the Chinese government dispatched a number of operatives to America to figure out, what is it that's made America so preeminently successful? Why are we now in this unipolar world where there's America and everything else, right? Because it can't just be this American exceptionalism thing. Obviously, they didn't believe that. They turned their nose up at that. They said, what is it? Let's get to the bottom of this. And the guy came back, the lead researcher that the CCP dispatched, came back with an interesting answer. It was Christian heritage. The guy ended up converting to Christianity. He said, the thing that makes America successful is precisely that heritage against which it's constantly kind of bucking, that it's always sort of fighting against. And it's that tension within the limits as sort of proscribed by the founding documents that has made America so successful. It's freedom arising from order. It's creativity arising within clearly defined limits. What's happened since then is that those limits have been taken away, both for private corporations, so they can do appalling things to people and abuse and addict us to various things, and obviously culturally as well. There are things on television that should not be on television. I mean, it should be a felony to glorify gang violence. It should be a felony to glorify prostitution. fucking obviously. It's obvious that that's the case. And America used to have all this stuff. It used to have codes for comic books. It used to have codes for Hollywood up until 50s and the 60s. And that's when everything went wrong, when those codes went away. So it's precisely that tension, that creative tension between the box.
I have loved hearing like aspects of both folks tonight, genuinely. I first got a glimpse of Stephen on Timcast a couple weeks ago, the day I got tickets for this. So I was like, wow. And I actually enjoyed hearing what you had to say then there as well too. Christian here, and I wanted to ask this, like, if you break it down to the like bare bones, religion is order. Would you guys agree with that? Like it builds a semblance of a structure of order.
Yeah, I mean, it provides a framework, builds a box, builds a wall, however you want to put it. Yeah, we can't think clearly or properly unless we can build walls, meaning unless we can distinguish some things from other things. And,
Yeah, I would say the way that I view it is like religion easily gives us a framework for ethics. It gives us a metaphysical understanding of the world, like where do things come from, and then it gives us like an epistemic understanding of the world. How do I know what's true or what's not true? I think religion like very easily packages those three things up. It gives it to us. We don't have to think about it, and then we focus on things like how do I make my wife happy, or how do I take care of my children without having to do all the work with the other stuff too.
How are you getting on with keeping your wife happy?
Better than you are with your ex-husband.
But,
I don't know. He just got a Ferrari. He seems all right.
The point I'm getting at is if you look at Council of Nicaea, 350 AD, to now, same pages in the book, same laws, same directives that we've been given as Christians. But if you look more, and to a point that I love that you brought up this tonight, was that Christianity, organized religion, has gone down in the last 20 years, 30%, and you see this rise of leftism. And you see this rise of people talking, or at least having a malleable framework that they just keep changing. And how dangerous that can be. Because, I mean, Hillary Clinton, totally against gay marriage. Come to presidential election. Oh, this is wrong that this was ever prevented from ever happening. She's pushing DOMA the entire time, up until this point. So, don't you think it's a little dangerous for left-wing protagonists to have this ever-changing doctrine, whereas other religions have had thousands and thousands of years to just follow the same mindset, the same order?
I think that, so while the texts themselves haven't changed, I feel like religious practices have kind of adapted to the modern era. I'll speak very narrowly about my religious experience and then more broadly. Very narrowly, I was a Catholic, and I'm from Omaha, Nebraska. In our archdiocese there, we had multiple Catholic churches, and just the divergence in thought around, for instance, gay people was wildly different from one church to another. In one church, we had very traditional preachers, almost resembled my girlfriend's Baptist church, like very, very, very hardcore people, very traditional, no children, no noises. There was like a glass room. They didn't really even want you to bring your kids there. And then in the other one, it was a way more friendly, more geared towards young people. I think we had, I don't know if every Christian church had like the 26-year-old guy that was like leading like the band for doing the music, and they had like drums and guitars and stuff. And that was it was like a night and day difference in those churches. That was just in my city. I can't imagine like worldwide how different it is. And then I look at people like Muslims, and you know we can talk about like Islamic extremism. If we look at the I'll hit on the gay thing again. In the United States, Muslims as a whole are more favorable towards homosexuality than the average American population, which is wild, right? Compared to other countries where there are some Islamic populations that still kill gay people, assuming you have enough witnesses or however it works in some of those countries today, or at the very least they try to make it illegal. So all of this is to say that like while I think that sometimes Christians or Muslims or any of the Abraham or any religion, they'll kind of lean on their text and they'll say, well, this is unchanging, and we've got the same text throughout all of time. I feel like the job of the community leaders, the preachers that do the sermons, that talk to the community, are constantly trying to, I don't want to say reinterpret, because that's not really right, but they're constantly trying to like adapt and readapt the teachings to make them fit in your modern day life. Like what would Jesus say to a kid that's paying more attention attention to his iPhone than his mom or dad telling him how to do chores. You're not going to find, Steve Jobs in the Bible, but you can still get teachings out of that. So, it's difficult, but I think that religion still changes and adapts, like anything else does, even if the text itself doesn't change. Was that okay? Or?
Well, yeah, the point I was making was, no, thank you. The point I was making was how the left keeps moving goalposts.
Mm-hmm.
They are, progressive, right?
Yeah.
They're moving goalposts. Tomorrow they may be completely against transgender, anything revolving transgender. They could be if it lost votes.
Sure.
And you see that time and time and time again. Whereas conservatism, by definition, is kind of holding back towards days of yore, I guess.
Maybe. I feel like both sides have changed a lot. So, like, for instance, if we, I think neocon is like a slur to conservatives, right? If you were to compare, like, the Bush era conservatives, those guys, to, like, the MAGA people today, these guys will hate each other, right? Because Bush era conservatives are, like, pro-corporation, pro-Iraq, pro-Afghanistan, generally speaking. And the Trump guys are like, I hate big companies, no foreign wars whatsoever, screw all of that stuff. So I feel like conservatives have changed a bit, too. I agree that, like, obviously progressives are pushing the envelope quite a bit, and conservatives are kind of saying like, well, hold on, but like their movement is growing and evolving as well, I would say.
Well, the relative change is night and day, though. You can't compare the two. And I have to, I have never in my life gone into a Latin Mass church where people are boxed off. I think you just made that up. If you didn't, please tell us what church it is, because that's not Catholic teaching.
Sure. One of the pairs I went to was St. Leo, the 10th, in Omaha, Nebraska. They have like a whole little glass enclosure. You can go into the church and you can see where the children are. I've been in plenty of Catholic churches that do exactly this for screaming children. Sounds like you haven't been in a church before, Milo, but go ahead.
I have been to, you leveled the charge against traditionalist Catholics, and I've been to Latin Masses with the FSSP and ICK and even SSPX all over the country for years. I must just have missed the churches you're going to, which is weird. As far as Muslims being more pro-gay, well, there's two things to say about that. One, I guess that disproves the case that immigrants are going to bring conservative values with them, so we should definitely close the borders. Because if the Muslims are coming in pro-gay and the Hispanics are coming in equally wobbly, there's no conservative social case for abortion. Close the borders, done. So that's helpful to know. But also, there's no contiguous landmass with any Muslim country here. Muslims who come to America are by definition wealthy, international, globalized, and seeking Western values and seeking to live in America. It's hardly surprising that the people who leave the Muslim world to come to America might be more in favor of progressive values, because that's precisely what they're leaving.
Hello, it's nice to see both of you. I'm also from Omaha, Nebraska, and I can tell you at least 3 other names of churches: St. Wenceslas, St. Robert's, and St. Cecilia's, and one of them is contritional. They all do the same thing, where they put the children in the back.
I'm not going to pretend it's a state I know well. So if that happens in that particular state, that's pretty gross.
I also lived overseas in Germany. They also had that as well, in very traditional cathedrals. My question is for you, Mr. Yiannopoulos. It has to do with, why should we assume that a Christian nation, returning to its Christian values, if we buy into the premise that this is a Christian nation, and it is a Christian nation because, as I understand it, because the founders were Christian, and therefore somehow that also influenced the text of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the Declaration of Independence, and that is what therefore makes this a Christian nation. My question to you is this return then, why should we assume that that would be friendly to all denominations, including Roman Catholics? And so my family is Roman Catholic, and I'm sure that you can appreciate this as someone who is deeply Catholic. Roman Catholics do not have a great history in this country.
No, it's quite an anti-Catholic culture in this country.
The Know Nothing Party of the 1850s, the first Roman Catholic president was John F. Kennedy.
KKK went after Catholics just like they did blacks.
And this was all done in the name of Christian nationalism. And
it was not done in the name of Christian nationalism, because that term did not exist.
Well, it was attached to the same ideology at the time.
Was it? Because you sort of did this sort of vague sketching of how somebody might come to a conclusion that since the founders were sort of Christian, then we should be sort of Christian too. But I gave you a much more precise and crisp and specific explanation than that, didn't I? What I said was that these documents were constructed outsourcing morality to Christianity, disestablishing the church. And that Adams said that they were constructed for immoral and religious people, and at that time he meant Christian. I also mentioned, and I did find the judge's name. It wasn't Rehnquist. I misspoke. It was William O. Douglas, who is one of the most famously left-wing Supreme Court justices of all time. And his quote was, "We are a religious people whose institutions presuppose a supreme being. The highest court of this land has confirmed repeatedly that America has a Christian foundation." So I think it's a bit unfair of you to sort of suggest that I was like gesturing vaguely at the founders and saying, well, since they're sort of Christian, then we've got a sort of Christian inheritance. I made a very specific and crisp explanation about the founding of this country. So let's just be clear on that before we proceed. Next up, I share your...
Can I ask a question on that? Why, we keep saying this, it was so clearly a Christian nation. Why is it so curiously absent from all of our founding documents?
Well, it was done on purpose, and it's not. It's not absent from Lincoln. It's not absent
from our Constitution, the thing that enshrines what the government is and does. And
you know perfectly well it's absent from those on purpose because the state, there is a separation of a technical, legal, and institutional separation of church and state in this country. But that does not mean that the founders were indifferent to whether or not people would be Christian. And indeed, they said the opposite. They said that they were making a country for a moral and religious people, by which they meant Christian. So the words of those documents were written very carefully and mostly to avoid Protestant infighting because of the different regions in America that were establishing themselves at the time. That's most of the reason. And those documents that do omit God for a very particular and specific reason. But God is woven into the culture of the country, whether it is, the Pledge of Allegiance or whatever else. And you can see it. You can see that tenor and texture and culture everywhere. In some specific documents, it is absent for the reasons that I've said. But you know perfectly well, and as I've tried to explain briefly this evening, this country was created on the understanding that, and that's the bit that's crumbling now, right? It's the on the understanding bit that's crumbling. And without that, the founders themselves said that the center cannot hold, and it isn't holding. And so that's the answer to you. And then I want to finish, I think the lady had a question for me, which I don't remember because I got interrupted. What was the second half of it?
I apologize.
No, it wasn't you, it was him.
Well, my question was, why should we assume that this new movement of Christian nationalism would be inclusive of all denominations? You mentioned, for instance, Pentecostal, Methodists, not a true Christian because they're not listening to the Gospels. Which Gospels, which interpretation of the Gospels? Different churches have different beliefs.
We can't necessarily, and we shouldn't, and there's a long history of, different strands of Christianity battling it out. But there's also, I think, much more importantly and more obviously and more persuasively, a tradition of countries that have an established state religion and what that does to the culture and how it impedes change for change's sake. And it seems to be a sacrifice worth making. Yeah, sure, I share your anxiety about Catholicism. America has imported Catholics now and again when it suited the country for the labor force. Whether it's getting some Irish guys in, getting some Italians in. I mean, Catholics aren't ever entirely and completely at home on this soil. Yeah, I share that. That's fair.
I think it's a fair question. I think you should push for harder answers. When people talk about wanting to exclude certain denominations or exclude certain religions from the country, I think you should push them on a solid answer for who particularly do you want to include or who particularly do you want to exclude. Not to draw the parallels, although the parallels write themselves. I think you can do similarly to people that are like white nationalists, right? When you've got people like Fuentes, who obviously has some Hispanic in him, right? Well, where do we draw the line at who's white enough for the country and who's not? And who's to say that once we've drawn one line, we're not going to look amongst ourselves and decide, well, we're going to draw this line even further. And I think it's a good question in regards regards to the Christian nationalist stuff too. I did a bit of reading for preparation for the debate, and it's actually insane how like undecided it is what Christian nationalism even means. Does that extend to people's ethnic backgrounds? Is Christianity going to become an ethnicity like Jewishness is just seen as an ethnicity? Are people wanting to include all Christians but give some more rights than others? Do people want to enshrine like Christian doctrine in law, like Sharia law? I have honestly no idea, and I don't feel like after listening to Milo ramble for an hour and a half, I have any more of an idea of what it is than when I came in here at the beginning of the night.
No, I don't think anybody knows, but that's because nobody used this expression more than 2 years ago. That's sort of what we're here to thrash out and talk about. And there's no person, unlike some movements. I mean, America First is kind of, Trump basically owns that and gets to decide what that means. Nobody has sort of stepped up and to the mantle of, I'm the Christian nationalism guy. There isn't one. So, Andrew Torber from Gab wrote a book, and Nick Fuentes talked about it briefly, and various other people have used it. Marjorie's used it and all the rest of it. But there isn't kind of a Christian nationalism guy. So I don't think it's concretely defined. But I'm not here to defend a nebulous political philosophy. I'm here to suggest that America might do better if, in the commonly understood sort of bucket of Christianity, and people make jokes and they say, oh, there are millions of Protestant denominations. When you actually look at it, like 99% of people fall into one of these 7 big buckets. I think it's reasonable to say, well, if you're in one of those buckets, you're a Christian, that's fine for now. It would be better if this country returned to an understanding of that moral underpinning that was a little bit closer to the people who came up with it in the first place. And that's all I'm here to do.
I will push you one more time, Mr. Yiannopoulos, and I'll make it more specific. So specifically the question of abortion. That's a great example of how different denominations disagree very fiercely on that question. Do you know how would, for instance, a return to a move to Christian nationalism resolve that?
I don't think there's any plausible Christian future for this country in which any sort of abortion is permitted. Under any circumstances. And this is one of the countries in the world that's got a very creditable record when it comes to ferocious pro-life advocacy. And it will be reassuring to you as a Catholic I think probably to hear that I don't really see any way of this proceeding except under uncompromising pro-life banner. But these are all open questions. I'm not pretending to be a encyclopedia on Christian nationalism because there isn't one. It's something that somebody just invented. But I definitely will stand here and defend Christ as the essential moral underpinning of our civilization. And there are people who worship him in various ways, and there are people who have fallen into various different kinds of Christian denomination, but I think brothers in Christ is a reasonably well understood expression, and I think a fair one, and that's good enough for me for now.
Well, before I will say one more thing, and then I promise I will hand the microphone back to you. Part of the reason why I'm asking is because my family history as a Catholic is as an Irish Catholic. My grandparents were involved with the Irish Republican Army at the time. The differences between Catholicism and Protestantism in Ireland during that time resulted in cars being blown up. It was not a peaceable place.
But you also know that there are a lot of other factors involved in there to do with borders, the English. I mean, there's a lot that went into that, right? It wasn't as simple as this is a religious conflict between North and South. I think it's most accurate to say that it was a kind of small civil war with heavy religious overtones or tempered, flavored, informed by religion, but this was not straight religious conflicts. It's just not true to say that. You know that.
I do not know that. It was such a deep conflict that my grandfather couldn't take a civil service exam in like the early 1900s. And I will leave you with that. I apologize for eating so much time.
No, you've been the most thoughtful questioner so far. You have no apology to make.
My question's for Milo. From Christian to Christian, I just want to let you know that there are a few things that I disagree with you tonight. Probably the biggest question I have I'm a bit puzzled at Christian nationalism itself. It seems like an oxymoron to me. And from theologian to theologian, because I assume that as a Christian, your beliefs stem from your theology, I wanted to ask you a theological question.
I will do my best. I've never described myself as a theologian, but I'll do my best.
All right. I wanted to ask you, how would you respond to the themes of Jesus resisting any type of political or physical authority here on earth? For instance, in John 18, when Pilate was questioning Jesus about his own nation handing him over to be crucified, Jesus said that his kingdom was not of this world. Also, another example would just be Jesus healing the Roman soldier who decided to hit him, right? So how do you know that you aren't wanting Jesus to become the political Messiah that the Jews expected them to free them from Rome, the very same Jesus that refused to take on that role?
Well, I'm a Catholic, so I'm quite comfortable with earthly spiritual authority. And Jesus didn't leave us a Bible, he left us a church in the form of the apostles, whose descendants that we call now bishops have continued his teaching to the present day. And that institution has become very wealthy, very complicated, very difficult to generalize about, and very controversial, I suppose, if from one particular point of view. Christ left us an institution. He birthed one when he said, "On this rock I build my church." He left us an institution. The fact that he destroyed a lot of bad ones when he was here only really serves to underscore the point.
So it's just a difference in authority.
Can you,
well, there's a valid, legitimate authority, which is authority stemming from Christ, which is the descendants of the apostles, the See of St. Peter.
Wait, can you reread the last part of that question? Sorry.
Sure. I said, how do you know that you aren't wanting Jesus to become the same political Messiah that the Jews expected to free them from Rome?
Okay, I'm taking a stab at it. It's been a long time, but isn't this what the render unto Caesar quote meant? That there are going to be things that exist in the domain of government where you have obligations and responsibility to the state, but those things exist separate to the obligations you have to your church and your family, so you can still live your best life being a Christian without expecting that to also fulfill like the political goals of your nation, no?
Correct, which is why we don't necessarily need Trump to be the most morally perfect person in order for him to be a good president. Exactly.
Yeah, I think Jesus' main point was just that he wasn't aiming for political power, and neither should his followers. That was pretty much what I got out of that.
Yes, that's fair, but that's a different question. But that's fair.
Thank you, everybody, for the great questions. Now we're going to do closings real quick, and then we're going to have to head out of here. Milo, you have 5 minutes, then Stephen, you have 5 minutes.
I seem to have got away with saying that I wasn't especially pro-Second Amendment in Tennessee, so I'm just going to take the win on that one. And simply tell you that I moved here with all of the usual assumptions about America. And having been here, it's a difficult thing to hear really, but you know, America is one of those countries that you sort of, what's that old quote? America always does the right thing once it's tried everything else first. And America seems to kind of regularly need these outside observers to tell it about itself, whether it's de Tocqueville or whatever. It's not very good at self-reflection. So all I can do is offer you what I've seen, and that is that the gap between the way America describes itself and the reality here is so enormous and so gigantic and so suicidally large, actually. The way that since the 1950s and 60s, this country has diverged from its founding objectives, from its founding morality, is terrifying. And the rest of the world needs you guys to be in good shape, to be in good fighting shape, and to get it together. Because we don't have many other options. China, Russia, oblivion, right? I do still think that the world's in good shape when America's in good shape. But it hasn't been for nearly 100 years now. You haven't won a war in 75 years. Do you know that? 75 years America hasn't won a war. Things are going very, very badly wrong here, and we need you. But we need you to be strong, we need you to be healthy, we need you to be wholesome, and we need you to be moral. We need that from you. Even though you're, our child in some ways, you've grown big and you've grown strong, and you're our protector. But our protector now is writhing on the ground, diseased, shrieking, blinded, and pathetic. And we've gone outside in the rest of the world from admiring this country, from moving here because we love the idea of its values so much to being confronted with the ugly reality that America's greatest export is now sodomy and vaccines and stuff like that. And that's not what it was supposed to be. So I would kind of encourage you to reflect on whether anybody is happier or better off, wealthier, doing better in 2023 than they were in 1953. And to say that, clocks can't be turned back is just historically ignorant. It's just completely wrong. But what normally happens is they're turned back very violently. What normally happens is that they're turned back by force, and they're turned back too far, or they're turned into something ugly. And that has happened again and again and again. And the window for America to save itself is closing. It's very narrow. Maybe a generation. Maybe it's too late. But you owe it to yourselves and to the rest of us to try. And if you want to make America the best it can be, if you want to be a good athlete, you got to train. If you want to be a good writer, you have to read and write. If you want to be a good America, you got to go to church. Thank you.
I hate you, Sean. This conversation was definitely something different than what I was expecting. Actually, you know what? No, it was exactly what I was expecting. I feel like Milo is kind of the perfect showman for the Christian nationalist movement. A lot of bravado, a lot of theatrics, a lot of 1 HP voicing, but no actual actionable material anywhere, no concrete ideology to stand on, no policy positions to recommend, not even like a clear or even a vague outline of what it is he even stands for. Maybe I just wasn't paying attention because I was watching Subway Surfers on my phone for half this debate. I don't know if anybody else in here feels like they came away with a better understanding of what Christian nationalism is than before they came in. But yeah. Something that I get very frustrated about when I talk about politics, the reason why I do these conversations, the reason why I talk to people who are as far away from me as people like Milo can be, is because I think it's important to cut through a lot of the bullshit that a lot of people preach when they're trying to turn people over to their new political movements. I think that we have very real problems today, and I don't think we ever have a chance to discuss them when we're talking about how much better life would have been in the 1200s or in the 1950s. We're not getting rid of cell phones. We're not putting women back in the kitchen. We're not getting rid of birth control. The internet's not going anywhere. We're not locking down our borders. We live in a world today that is as much different from 1980 as 1980 was from the 1200s that, Milo's so obsessed with. And I think that we need better conversations with people, better policies that we can advocate for, better things that we can talk about to move our people forward, rather than having people endlessly fracture and atomize themselves in these silly little political movements that people can't even adequately define. So if you come away from here tonight, I hope that when you talk to your friends about things related to this, if you want to talk about church, talk about a church you want to go to, talk about actions that you do. The cool things about my church is that every Saturday or every Sunday or whenever you went to Mass, you got to meet a group of people, you got to socialize, you got to have a community. Sometimes you would do community events, and you would just have basically communities that you would develop around that you would do things with every week, because socializing with each other is really important. I think this is one of the things that we miss the most today, especially when we spend all of our time in front of our phones and our computers. I hope that people continue to find things in their life to build upon. Maybe in future conversations we can, or not we, but me and somebody else can talk about the different things that you can do to build upon that. And I hope you guys don't get lost down these really weird niche micro ideologies that offer you, the universe and talk about absolutely nothing.
Thank you guys. Let's all give one big final round of applause for our debaters.